This week's episode of Couch Potatoes Unite! Is sponsored by Found Penny Studio. Found Penny Studio is exclusively fulfilling our Patreon Tier 3 merchandise perk by doing what they do best, creating to celebrate everyday moments like your favorite TV series. Check out Found Penny Studio's creations at foundpennystudio.com and find Couch Potatoes Unite on Patreon at www.patreon.com/couchpotatoesunite.
You say you wanna watch a drama. You say you wanna watch a comedy. Well, you can watch it with your mama, or you can watch it with your daddy. You'll even sit and watch it with your middle schooler, so you can come and talk around a water cooler. We're watching all day and all night. Couch Potatoes Unite. Whoa, whoa. Couch Potatoes Unite. Whoa, whoa. Couch Potatoes Unite.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the podcast entitled Couch Potatoes Unite! Which is based on a blog of the same name because Temba, his arms open. With names! My name is Kylie and I love TV. If you feel the same, keep listening and or checking out our website, couchpotatoesunite.wordpress.com, as you're bound to find some common ground or something you like. For at Couch Potatoes Unite, we're all about the wonders and the unique long-form storytelling of the small screen. CPU, ! Hopes you've been following releases of brand new episodes of the podcast on Wednesdays, as well as new blog entries on some Tuesdays, and as always, we have several more new episodes on the way. Because the panelists and I live lives behind our podcast, the episodes are published once per week. Subscribe to the website or the podcast via iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, via Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Amazon Music, basically wherever you get your podcasts to stay on top of brand new episodes. Episodes already published discuss a variety of shows around the water cooler, including but not limited to Stranger Things, iZombie, The Good Place, Game of Thrones, American Horror Story, Grace and Frankie, Mr. Robot, Charmed, and Riverdale. We've published several episodes in our Looking Back series covering such diverse shows as Revenge, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Freaks and Geeks, and The Americans. Plus, new episodes are in the works, including revisits for Altered Carbon, Doctor Who, Schitt's Creek, Westworld, Fuller House, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Will and Grace, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., The 100, The Crown, Supernatural, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. The MASH retrospective series panel will reminisce about seasons 4 through 7. The Breaking Better series panel will digest the Netflix sequel movie special El Camino, and the DCTU series will talk season 5 of DC's Legends of Tomorrow. We'll be launching new panels covering This Is Us, The Orville, Big Little Lies, The Good Doctor, Call the Midwife, The Animaniacs, Killing Eve, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And because we look back at shows now past, we'll travel through time and experience all sorts of identities with Quantum Leap. We'll thank the Golden Girls for being friends. We'll cry bazinga for Big Bang Theory, and we'll dive deep into the fantasy world of the magicians. By the way, did you know that CPU also from time to time goes live? We've been live from bunkers, comedy shows, Comic-Cons, and game stores. Plus, we're planning more live appearances and other cool stuff, including in these semi-quarantine times. So make sure you like or follow us at our Facebook page, our Twitter at CPU Podcast, our Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite, or subscribe to the website, our YouTube channel, our Apple iTunes channel, our Stitcher Radio channel, or find us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. Plus, brand new for 2021, you can subscribe to us via Patreon. In an effort to get fancier, to upgrade some of our stuff, to build some capacity, Couch Potatoes Unite is on Patreon to provide the opportunity to subscribe for perks, including member-exclusive email and Discord access, bonus content, TV-themed merch, and the ability to join CPU for occasional watch parties, and in so doing, possibly to place priority requests for shows that we cover. If any of this sounds like fun to you, head on over to Patreon or download the app and search for our name, Couch Potatoes Unite. Don't forget the exclamation point. In the meantime, if you don't hear a show in this podcast format, fellow panelists and I still write reviews, and we always seek new panelists. So if you have any interest in joining the discussion, say hello by finding us at any of those outlets I've mentioned. At the very least, stop by and leave us a thumbs up, comment, or review. We like feedback. Just decloak your warbird and be direct about it. Don't make us enter the neutral zone. Today's panel and I are continuing the biggest looking back series we've ever launched by request of one of our panel members and our second most involved panelist, who made such an impassioned speech about this series of series at one of our live Comic-Con events. We were moved to embark upon this now continuing mission of galactic proportions. If you aren't already aware, from time to time, CPU will be choosing shows of all types, but usually of some fame or notoriety to reminisce about and to consider whether or not they age gracefully like an android obsessed with the human condition, or don't hold up as well like an omnipotent alien being obsessed with testing the human condition. As such, this is another chapter of our Looking Back podcast episodes, wherein we review a show that has been gone, either via natural end or cancellation, for some time. And this is but one chapter in a 30-episode or more series in which we will explore each individual season of a science fiction universe that comes back without never completely going away in cycles that have recurred for more than 50 years. Today, we offer you episode 9 of this mega series, which will cover the entire Star Trek franchise. In today's 9th episode, we'll be discussing the 5th season of The Next Generation. Each new episode in this new CPU podcast franchise will progress through subsequent seasons of all the Star Trek TV series, with additional coverage of the films. Furthermore, our panel will be rotating moderation duties. However, your friendly neighborhood chief couch potato and captain of the Starship CPU is not ready to give away the helm just yet. I am moderating today's discussion and the entire run of The Next Generation because, if you didn't already pick this up, this is my favorite chapter, and this is my privilege as the chief couch potato. Also, at various points in this mega series, we'll present top 10 best and bottom 10 worst episode lists around various themes chosen by the moderator in question, as we tend to do with our retrospective series. Can't get started without a tiny bit of plot summary, though, so to remind you listeners, Star Trek The Next Generation is an American science fiction television series created by Gene Roddenberry. It originally aired from September 28, 1987 to May 23, 1994 in syndication, spanning 178 episodes over the course of 7 seasons. Season 5 aired from September 23, 1991 to June 15, 1992, with a total of 26 episodes. The third series in the Star Trek franchise, it is the second sequel to Star Trek the Original Series. Set in the 24th century, when Earth is part of the United Federation of Planets, it follows the adventures of a Starfleet starship, the USS Enterprise D, in its exploration of the Milky Way galaxy. The Next Generation features a new crew starring Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Jonathan Frakes as Commander William Riker, Brent Spiner as Lieutenant Commander Data, Michael Dorn as Lieutenant Worf, LeVar Burton as Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge, Marina Sirtis as Counselor Deanna Troi, Gates McFadden as Dr. Beverly Crusher, and a new Enterprise. The series was broadcast in first-run syndication with dates and times varying among individual television stations. Today, in part 9 of our many multi-part Star Trek series, our modestly sized crew of Enterprise faithful and Trekkers extraordinaire, namely Nick, Sarah, Kyle, and Michael, along with your very involved moderator, will talk about the finer and less fine points of Season 5 of The Next Generation. It should be noted that all of our panelists have viewed the entire Next Gen series and may discuss sensitive plot points, so for those of you who have not watched Star Trek The Next Generation, first of all, we'd be happy to beam you aboard and wonder what you've exposed yourself to up until this point, and second, if you plan to do so, listen at your own risk, as there may be major spoilers. Welcome back, panel! How are you?
Good. Awesome!
Living the dream.
Living the dream. All right. Is the dream in any way inclusive of talking about Season 5 of TNG?
You know it.
All right. That was a trick question. They're here to do it whether they want to or dream about it or not. So, as you know, if you've been following our Star Trek series, we don't go over the standard CPU character question that changes with each show we do. Every time we change to a new season within a series, we have a different character question for each series, but I will have our panel remind you, gentle listener, who they are by their first name and who they chose when we talked about it in our Season 1 episode. And if you haven't caught this series, either from its very first episode covering the original series on up, or if you're a TNG exclusive adoring person, then you can start at that one, but it's in that episode that they talk about who they love as far as the character question and what their interest is or their adoration is of the Next Generation. So, without further ado, let's reintroduce the panel. Who wants to go first?
My name's Nick.
Hi, Nick.
And I don't remember what character I picked.
That's
Picard?
a lie. Shenanigans. This is the 5th time we've talked about it, Nick. Yes, you did pick Picard. Why did you pick Picard? Do you at least remember that?
Well, I love Star Trek as a franchise, and Next Gen is definitely one of my favorite, if not favorite. I don't know, I can't pick a favorite. But I really do enjoy the show, the characters on it, what it was doing with the Star Trek franchise, and the commentary it is making on humanity and androids and all that.
Androids and all that. Well, welcome back, Nick. Thank you for your introduction. Who would like to go next?
I'll go since I'm married to Nick.
Okay.
This is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
I said Will Riker. I think because this is my second favorite series, so I picked the second in command.
That seems to be the reasoning you're sticking with. Welcome back, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael.
I picked Picard because this is definitely one of my favorite Star Trek shows. And probably, I don't know if it's right up there because, again, I'm not fully familiar with all the new ones yet, so I can't quite make the full ranking as of yet, but that will be forthcoming in the next couple years. I don't know if it'll take that long to get to Discovery or not. Who knows? We'll see. But I also had a little bit of Troy in there because not only is she one of my favorite characters on the show, but also I do like the interpersonal relationships of the characters on the show. And that was one of her attributes that you listed in her character breakdown because it's just... To me, this season and this show doesn't work without the characters. So that's me.
Fair enough. Welcome back, Michael.
I'm Kyle.
Hi,
I think
Kyle.
Based on the character breakdown, I think I was Geordi, I believe.
You were.
Okay, yeah, because unlike the rest of them, this is not my favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. It rates very highly, and I do love the characters, but I'm not as invested, so I'm nowhere near Picard. My heart is Kirk, as always.
Yes, he is an original series purist if you haven't caught the general drift of Kyle's preferences. Kyle, what else are you besides Geordi and not Picard?
I mean, I'm sure I tried to wiggle Data in there somewhere since he's my favorite.
I feel like we stumble over this segue every time.
I don't have the best memory for this stuff, so I always forget.
Hashtag dynamics, Kyle. What's our dynamics?
Sorry. I am the moderator's brother-in-law. I'm married to her sister, who's usually on these podcasts with us, except for not the Star Trek ones, because unlike me, she doesn't really branch out into beyond the original series. I actually do watch them, though, but she doesn't love them like the rest of us.
Yes, and she usually helps Kyle out by doing the disclaimer. Welcome back, Kyle! And of course, my name is Kylie, and I'm moderating as I've mentioned and established. And I picked Picard. And I told you why. This is my favorite Star Trek of all the Star Treks. Not that I don't have appreciation for other Star Treks. I just have the most appreciation for the Next Generation, as this was the series that I started my Trekker-loving fandom on. Okay, so if you've been following our Star Trek series, you know that what we do is kind of talk a little bit in general about the season we're on, and we will. It's season 5 of the Star Trek The Next Generation. And then we talk about notable episodes, both best and worst. We do little mini lists. This just helps us to prepare for the much larger list that will come when we get to the end of the series. So let's talk about season 5. What did you like? What didn't you like? You know, that old chestnut.
I'll start because I have a little, not really a story, but this is my favorite season, I think. Or this is when I really start to get into Trek lore, and this was my in, I think. Because this is the 91, 92, I feel like this was the time in my life when I started to obsess over anything fandom-wise, and because I can remember watching many of these episodes with my dad and my brother, and so revisiting them this time was a lot of fun, because it's like, oh, hey, I remember that. I remember what was going on in my life when this episode came on. Oh, hey, there's that one episode that for whatever reason we literally watched like 5 or 10 times in a single weekend, because I think my dad was trying to perfect his sound system, and it just happened to be this episode that he was trying to get right or whatever. So for whatever reason, I think this is one of my favorite seasons. Just everything about it. I had a really hard time picking a bottom 3.
I would agree that this season has a high volume of really good episodes. I feel like this season knows a little bit better what they're doing with character dynamics and with like the past seasons. There's so many good episodes that tie back to things like a twist on the Borg. Troy is in command for an episode. They give Picard kids for one episode. Like they know what they're doing. They're doing different takes on it, and they're doing it in a really entertaining way.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about TV shows of this era, but it always seemed like it took 5 seasons for a show to really find its footing, like to find a rhythm where it's just like, yeah, we're just cruising along, having fun, stirring up the dynamics of characters. I feel like there's like clockwork. There was a season 5 character mix-up episode with the episode of Disaster in this case. It's like by 5 seasons, you know your characters, you know what their dynamics are between, you know, who's in command, who's not, or who's in love with who and whatever. So it's like, it takes 5 seasons. It's like, you know what, the writers, we need to mix things up. So let's take this character who we've never had interact with this character and put him in a turbo shaft before, or whatever. And that was... A lot of TV shows from this era tend to do that around season 5, it seemed like.
This season really, I like it because it has a lot less like gimmicky, over the top episodes. Like they know that what characters work and work together, and they let the actors just go. There's more scenes of just like interpersonal stuff, and I like that. I like that a lot. That's why the first season is so rough. It feels like some of the episodes are so kind of gimmicky. But by this point, everything is settled down. Like the cement is hardened. Like this show is what people love about it.
The first 3 seasons, it's like they're trying to figure out the cast dynamics because they change so much. And even season 4, losing Wesley is only one character and it's halfway through, but it was an easier thing to maneuver. Once they're at 5, they seem to really know what they're doing.
Well, I was also going to respond to a couple of points because, Michael, you were making more of a general statement about TV shows of the time. Got to remember that back in 1991 or 2, the years that you cited for this season, there were 3 major networks and about 40 cable stations and a handful of premium. There wasn't the bloat that we had right now, where basically there's hundreds and hundreds of TV things happening all of the time, and some of them are franchises like this one that have existed over a long ways. So they had a lot more time to play. They didn't have the ability or to make mistakes. They didn't really have kind of that crunchability where they had to grab, or requirement where they had to grab people's attention and get them to stick to the show earlier than what they used to have to do back in those days. And so I think that's true of Star Trek. That's true of really any of the major hour-long dramas or sitcoms. You know, they were more likely to get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 seasons, depending upon what the show was. The other thing I would say is that, yes, by season 5, this is old hat. I mean, I think the second half of season 3 is when everything clicks in for Star Trek The Next Generation. But season 5 is what you find as the evolution of that clicking in. And Nick hit it right on the head. At this point, the cast stays the same for the rest of the series. So they know who they have, they know who they're playing around with, and they've also found, even though they've used some gimmicky things, some of those gimmicky things they keep replaying because they found out what works and what doesn't. So this just shows maturation, it shows intelligence, it shows that the writers learn from their past mistakes and learn from the things that work the best, which we can't always say about TV nowadays, which is what makes this podcast so fun.
I agree with everything you just said. That was a very good way of putting that.
Star Trek also has me going to Wikipedia and answering a question. Is this the first time a TV show has done something like this? And it isn't always necessarily the first time, but it is like, the example from this season is cause and effect with the time loop. There's a lot of Star Trek series have done it since then, but a lot of shows, I think almost at least 2 or 3 of the DCTU, the CW verse were doing, but there's a lot that do it. And really in my research, I couldn't find much more than a Twilight Zone episode that kind of had that looping thing.
This episode aired before Groundhog Day was ever released in theaters.
Yes.
But
yeah,
they're now
so this
called
is one of the first to
Groundhog
do
Day
that,
episodes.
which is crazy because I think it does it really well. And you don't have to, like, I don't know, in other ones there has to be a gimmick. Even other Star Trek ones, there's just a weird other gimmick that you have to, like, bypass in your brain to be like, okay, this is what we're doing and that's fine. let's just be entertained by it. But this way, with just a temporal anomaly, which is something we're used to in Star Trek, works out fine with me. And with a Kelsey Grammer payoff, you don't. It's almost perfect.
It's smart writing because they took something that was already established, like the poker game, and made that kind of the cornerstone of the episode. And that was something we could latch onto. And by the end, like, I was saying the numbers along with him as he was dealing. But then when he dealt all the threes, it was like, what's happening? It's my favorite kind of episode, and there's like 3 or 4 of them this season where everybody's on the ship. There's a problem that they all have to solve, but they maybe can't all work together, or for whatever reason. Disaster is one of those, and there's just a couple. I think Conundrum might be the other one this season, and I just love those episodes. I love them in every time we get those in the Star Trek universe, but I feel like here is where they really perfected that craft.
The so-called bottle episode.
Yeah.
And also,
I don't know if you could describe what that means for any of our listeners.
You can.
Well, I mean, I don't know if Star Trek invented the term, but when I was on Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, it made it seem like the article for bottle episode made it seem like that this term was originated on Star Trek. But basically, the idea is every time an hour-long or any type of TV show needed to save money, they would do what was called a bottle episode, which is where they would use established sets and locations in order to contain or bottle up the action in a place where they didn't have to do any special effects or any new sets or any new characters. There's no guest stars. So it's just a way to save money by, quote-unquote, bottling up the action in a single place or a couple of locations.
And it's not just restricted to, I mean, I think they're now called Groundhog Day episodes as kind of a colloquial nickname, even though Groundhog Day came after this one. But it isn't just I mean, it's sci-fi all over the place. DC has done it. The last season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had a Groundhog Day episode. I mean, X-Files. There's lots of science fiction properties and even some strictly fantasy ones that kind of deal in this time loop, must right the wrong to break the loop kind of problem. And so, but I do think you're right that this might be one of the very first times we ever see it. It's certainly very memorable in the way they do it as well.
And I love how this one is more of, it kind of starts out from Beverly's perspective, but because of the poker game and how it affects everyone and it goes right to Geordi, they use the whole cast well. And because none of them actually know, Beverly doesn't actually know what's happening, they're working together to figure it out. Most of the ones that I've seen, obviously X-Files, there's only 2 cast members anyway, but it's like they pick the Bill Murray and it's just that person that's living through this thing, whereas every single other one, they know they're repeating the same day, whereas this, they have to figure it out.
It's so smart that they used Beverly and not Deanna, because it would have been so easy to use Deanna because she's so instinctual and she can sense things so well. And I feel like that this is smarter writing to not focus as much on her and let us see it through the other people on the ship.
Or Guinan. If they had used Guinan, they could have just been like, something's not right. And then, she could just basically explain the whole thing right away.
But that's what this season, I think, does better than the previous ones, is more of those episodes where you get the crew working together, like Disaster, Conundrum. Those are my favorite Star Trek episodes, is when that being said, there's plenty of them that are about one person that are amazing episodes, but those are my favorite, they tend to be a better episode for me, more enjoyable.
And I think that's why I gravitate towards the original series, because they let them do that more with like the core. And then in the first few seasons of Next Gen, it's like they always did like pairings instead of like relying on the entire crew. But at this point, they let the crew just be an actual crew, and there aren't more of those awkward splits.
Yeah.
Is there anything you don't like about this season particularly?
The Wesley Crusher Starfleet episode.
You're wrong.
Oh, ouch.
Wrong.
That's harsh.
Shenanigans.
That's harsh.
That episode. I love that episode.
I love that episode too.
I do too.
That's one of the best Wesley Crusher episodes in the whole series.
That's the low bar.
I think you're just being stubborn. He's a Taurus.
I just think they're in denial. I mean, the dude was kicked off Star Trek.
No, he left of his own accord because they weren't giving him anything
this.
to do. Yeah. And
nobody liked him.
Why are you picking a fight with her? Like, you're really going at it.
I just don't like the character. I never did.
I actually really think the first duty, that episode where I honestly think it does well by the Wesley Crusher character, because it puts him in a situation where he really has to fight for his what his ethics are going to stand for. Because does he want to be loyal to his duty, his mates, his shipmates, or does he want to do the right thing by telling the truth? Does he want to, does he do the right thing and be, this beacon for his father figure, Picard, and his mom, Beverly, or does he strike his own path? I don't know. I just think, honestly, I think he has some really good acting in that episode.
He does, and it isn't just about, it's all of that, but it's also undermining a little bit or subverting what everybody understood to be about Wesley Crusher up until that point.
The goody-goody, yeah.
Just because he can't think his way out of it. He has to make a choice. He has to own up to mistakes that were made, some of which were his, even though ultimately he was following orders. Plus, it features Tom Paris as the captain of Nova Squadron. Prior to his appearance as the later pilot of Starship Voyagers. So, I think there's a lot that is really great about it. Plus, you have the B-plot with Picard kind of doing the side investigation, talking to the famed groundskeeper Boothby, who's played by longtime character actor Ray Walston. There's just a lot of really good nuggets inside this episode. Wesley Crusher is kind of a device, but also it feels a little bit like Star Trek's almost making amends with him a little bit, because they didn't give him any real juicy material prior to leaving, and a lot of that had to do with the fan reaction, not unlike what Kyle is having today, to Wesley Crusher, and the fact that the character saved the ship and did all this other stuff, and boo frickety who, but then now they've put him in a situation where there's no good way out of it. It's whatever's going to make him a man or make him a better officer, and he actually has to make the choice that's the least popular choice, and it doesn't help him. It sets him back years-wise in Starfleet Academy, and is kind of the first step toward his inevitable future, which we see in Season 7.
Also, a little bit of fun trivia, I don't know if we all know this, when Voyager was being developed, there was some talk that Robert Duncan McNeil's character would be a continuation of his character from this series, but for whatever reason they scrapped that.
I know the reason.
What was the reason, Sarah?
They didn't want to have to pay royalties on that character. So they just based Tom Paris on that character so they wouldn't have to pay royalties on every Voyager episode to the people that wrote that one Next Gen episode.
Well, that's just a cop-out.
Yeah.
That's a lot of character payments, 7 seasons to somebody who wrote one episode. Yeah.
Well, it's always different with each writer, too. Some writers they write the character and then they say, okay, it belongs to Paramount. Others have it in their contracts that any character they write, they get money forever.
Well, I'm going to say a thing I don't really like about this season, and I know I'm in the minority. I'm sure people love this character. But I have just never been a big fan of Ro Laren. I could just take her or leave her. I don't, cringe when she's in an episode, and there are some that she's in that I really like, but I just don't. I never was attached to her.
She was only created because they were coming up with Deep Space Nine, and she was supposed to be one of the main characters. So for me, I agree. She's one of the weak parts of the season because they introduced her just with the idea that she was going to be spun off on her own,
and then she didn't.
Yeah,
I like Ro only because I like Michelle Forbes, the actress, and I think Michelle Forbes does a great job with that character. And I wish they had done more with her. That's I see your criticism there, there's not much to her. It's well, they only gave her I looked it up, they only gave her 6 or 7 episodes the entire 3 seasons she was on the show, and I just wish they had done more with her. I like the arc she eventually has.
I am not a big fan of Ro either, and it's really because with the idea that they were they were seeding the Bajorans and the Cardassians as an overarching thing anyway. So as a device, she's fine. When she starts doing the whole sexual tension thing with Riker, I'm kind of I don't buy it. I don't find anything remotely enticing about that pair. Yeah, it got weird. It's not good. Even if, I mean, Riker, he's with a lot of women and Troy's okay with it. It's not about Troy. It's just about Ro and Riker, in my mind, don't work together even as sexually tense. But I agree with Sarah. There are still a couple of episodes. I actually have one in my honorable mentions that I really, really enjoy that she's a featured player in. But giving her more, no, I think we got just enough. So...
Okay, then. I mean, honestly, I don't like the Riker-Ro dynamic either. I just thought that was really forced in that episode in particular. However, I do really love that scene between Troy, Ro, and Riker in Conundrum. Mm-hmm. I love that scene is like, I don't particularly like that episode, but to me that one scene saves the episode. For at least a little bit anyway. Also,
I like that episode. I just think that scene is weird because you don't remember these people, but you're going to sleep with someone, and then it's like, oh, that's going to get weird when you're at work the next day. Am I the only practical person? I just can't.
I feel the same way. I just want to mention though that Riker in that scene does not do the Riker maneuver when he sits down.
What's the Riker maneuver?
Oh, you don't know what the Riker maneuver is?
Leg over chair.
Oh, I didn't know it had a nickname.
Oh yeah, it's the Riker maneuver. For our listeners that may not be aware, yes, there are videos on YouTube that chronicle how Jonathan Frakes had this thing where he would sit down in a chair by literally climbing over the back side of it with his leg. And he would do it so naturally in a single stroke, you wouldn't even notice it. And a lot of fans have speculated that it's a sign of dominance, that it's sort of his masculine way of showing off, because it's like, oh, I'm just going to sit down by climbing over the back of the chair. I mean, he does it so smoothly. Of course, he's also very tall.
That's what I was going to say.
Interesting. He doesn't do it in that scene because he's in a vulnerable place. So,
I was just going to say he's tall. It seems like a laid-back... I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of male flirtatiousness thing going on in it, but I didn't know it had a nickname.
There's just a lot of memes from all the different times he does it, if you follow Star Trek memes.
And there's a real tall stool he does it with, too, that you could tell it's just Frakes, really, I'm going to do it. Do you know what the Picard maneuver is?
Well, yeah, the Picard maneuver is the starship, doing a quick warp from one part of space to a very short period away so that it looks like the ship's in two spots at once.
Is it when he tugs on his uniform?
Yes.
The other Picard maneuver. Not the in-universe Picard maneuver.
I would like to point out that Season 5 is the season of the very chic suede jacket over the gray thing that Picard's wearing, which he abandons in later seasons, but I really enjoy it in this context. I thought that was a sharp look. They should have kept that going.
He has it in a lot of episodes.
I wonder if it's because suede is so hot and it's hot on the set, and he was like, I don't want to wear suede anymore.
I thought it was something he requested, like a jacket that he could take off. I don't know.
A lot less to tug.
First when we see it in his Dharmak, and he literally does have to take a layer off for a pillow or something. I don't know.
That might be the first time they use it, too.
People do like to call it the Picardigan. Which I enjoy.
It's a jacket, not a cardigan. If you're gonna make nicknames, be accurate. That's all I'm saying. I have feelings, I guess. Okay.
It's a nitpicky thing to be upset about this season.
Well, okay.
So, in binging these episodes, as I have been, I've noticed that something like 90% of every episode this season starts with the same shot. It's literally the same shot of the Enterprise coming from the center of the screen towards you, with maybe sometimes they add in a star warp effect behind it, but sometimes they don't. It's literally the same shot with Picard saying Stardate 4573 whatever.
The captain's log.
And I know that I know they had to save money by recycling shots over and over again. It was just noticeable because I was binging it.
You also have to remember, by this point, the cast contracts were so high that, reusing ship shots is the only thing to do.
Didn't bother me.
I was going to say, that just makes it more of a spiritual successor to the original series, because they had to do that every single episode.
And it's comforting. I find Patrick Stewart's voice comforting.
He is pretty amazing, I will admit that.
And, what are you going to do? He gives you 30 seconds of exposition in those captain's logs. So.
And again, deflating my own nitpick, we could argue that again, because it's season 5 and they've gotten into the rhythm, that this is what they've established as their formula. You start out with a shot of the ship coming out of warp, doing whatever mission they're doing, and the captain starts out by saying, this is the mission that we're starting on, Stardate 45, whatever. And that's just, it gets you in there. You're if you're watching it week after week after week, it's the way you settle into the show.
Yeah. I agree with that assessment, that's what it is. Wow, we have a lot of things to say about Season 5. I will say that I think in watching Season 5, I might like Season 4 just a hair touch more. But
I would agree with that. I think Season 4 has some of the more iconic episodes that really stand out amongst all of Star Trek. This one has some great ones, like Cause and Effect and Unifications, but yet, 4 is, so huge.
It's got some of the big ones that everybody gravitated to pretty quickly in their individual lists. Whereas with this one, yeah, exactly. There are some good ones. I almost estimate that we're going to have very different lists with this season, just because there are so many good ones, and I think personal preference is probably going to factor in a lot more even in our personal rankings than it has in the past 4 seasons. Because when I was making my lists, I kept thinking, but I bet Sarah's going to pick this one, and I bet Michael's going to pick this one.
I said that to Nick today. I said, I know Kyle's going to love Unification because it has Spock, and he loves that.
Well, that's like my bottom list. They're not bad episodes. I don't hate them. So, listing them as, my bottom 5 doesn't mean I dislike them at all. I really had to pick, I don't love this character as much, so I'm putting this on the bottom. It's not really because it's bad television. It's still good television. But in the realm of Star Trek, it's just middling.
Yeah, agreed.
Any other general comments? Or are we going to, in the fastest time ever, switch straight into those lists?
There are some episodes we should talk about, like the character Hugh, I think, is a great introduction to Star Trek lore, who will go on.
I'm going to just foreshadow that Borg features on my top.
Anything with Borgs pretty much are guaranteed in my lists. But I really love the character of Hugh, and then the later series we will talk about much, 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 much later. I was so happy that they brought him back, and that if anything,
Spoiler.
the actor has gotten better.
Spoiler for Picard.
I didn't say which series. I spoiled nothing.
Well, but it's logical.
He also comes back in the Next Gen for an episode.
That's true.
But I like that actor, and he just gets better with time. And just this little seed that we get here sets up so much later, and sets up so much questions with the Borg of what individuality do they have. We thought Picard was a special case as Locutus, but this raises that question, which will eventually go on into 7 of 9. But this is the character that starts it all, and I think that's an important thing to think about in Star Trek, especially the Next Generation timeline.
I just want to mention that, what is her name that plays 7 of 9? Yes. She's super good friends with Jonathan Del Arco. I remember his name. I don't know why I couldn't remember hers. But just because they've always been featured on a lot of conventions and appear a lot together, and now of course they've been on the same show, but just because of that connection. So I follow them both on Twitter. They're super supportive of each other. It's really cute.
They were really lucky with that actor because he was young and he was good. But they didn't know that he was going to get even better and stay good.
How many shows where you get an actor like this and that actor just drops out of acting immediately afterwards?
Yeah.
It's a really good episode.
One thing I will say about this season is that I think the guest stars have gotten better than in previous seasons. I made a previous comment in I think it was either season 3 or 4 episode, how they seem to be mining, they seem to mine the central casting for the guest star spots, and some of them were just okay, but they seem to be doing a better job this season with their guest stars and their one-off actors who are oh hey, you're actually putting some thought and character work into this, and not just reciting your lines or being dubbed over entirely.
Well, I mean, at this point, it was like the most watched show on television, I believe.
Well,
So at this point, it's like you had to bring your A game. It wasn't that question of, is this going to be a cheesy retread of a 60s canceled show? People knew what they were getting into, and so it was a much higher profile.
It wasn't most watched, but it was most syndicated, and it was winning Emmys by this point.
Yeah.
So people were aware of it.
And some of the not too well-known guest stars were going to see play many characters in Star Trek throughout. I think Next Phase had 3 actors in it that like are in the next 3 Star Trek series as different characters. One of them playing the Borg Queen in Voyager. Also Oliver Queen's mom on Arrow.
Yes, Susanna Thompson. She was a Romulan. I was like, that's Moira Queen.
I mean, and we also got passed with, I think it was Dharmak, the guy that played Captain Tyrell.
Paul Winfield, the great Paul Winfield.
R.I.P.
I just looked up this guy's name, but when we were watching The First Duty, and he was the dad of the boy that died, Commander Albert, and his name's Ed Lauder, and I was like, well, he is literally in everything, Nick. Like, what is his name? We had to look him up, and he's in an X-Files, and he's just like in everything. He passed away, R.I.P. But I really enjoyed his performance too, and you see him everywhere. He's like one of those people that just pops up in all kinds of shows.
He likes to play villains. He's one of those villainous character actors, or dastardly types.
Yeah. Is he a villain in X-Files? I can't remember what one he was in.
I think he's in the one where they're stranded in the Antarctic base or something, and there's the rip-off of The Thing, maybe?
No. He's in season 1 of X-Files. The episode is Space, and he was the astronaut that was being haunted by some sort of ghost alien.
Okay.
Not my favorite episode of X-Files, but he did a good.
I was mixing 2 episodes up.
One guest star we didn't get that they either tried or scheduling or he said no was Robin Williams. He was supposed to be in A Matter of Time.
Oh my goodness. Seriously?
Yeah.
And they got Matt Frewer instead.
Yeah.
Oh my! I would have loved to have Robin Williams on that episode as that character.
That would have made that episode
just like
better.
Mork.
Might have been distracting, but I don't know. I like Matt Frewer. I think he's great. So
it's not.
I do too. Yes.
I guess
do
it's
agree.
in my bottom half of the episodes for season 5. I don't hate it, but I just. One of the things I think about, I mean, I don't know, Robin Williams is distracting, but Matt Frewer is also distracting. At the time, if you were alive in the 80s, he was Max Headroom, and you knew who that guy was. So it's just kind of...
And the next-door neighbor dad from Honey, I Shrunk the
Yeah,
Kids.
the next-door neighbor, that was right around that time, too. You're absolutely right.
Or I think Honey, I Shrunk was right before this.
I think you're right. Yeah.
87 or 88 or 89. It was 89.
Wasn't he in the sequel, though? So
I think he was, actually.
I don't think he was in the sequel.
No?
I don't think he was in Blew Up the Kid, no.
No. He is in a lot of horror movies. He also did some really good PBS Sherlock Holmes specials. He makes a really good Sherlock Holmes.
Oh.
That's high praise coming from Kyle. I don't know.
I do like A Matter of Time because it makes me feel like there's a lot of people, like he should be hanging out with the people from season 1 that are not from this time period. They're like, we slowly throughout this Star Trek accumulate people in this timeline that are from all over that just don't fit and are never going back.
It would have been fun if they'd had Robin Williams and Brock Guinan on, though, because that would have been 2/3 of comic relief. But if wishes were dreams and stuff like that. Okay.
I will say, I did still list it highly. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I will say I do still list it highly, but I will say, since we're just talking about things, the unification 2-part, obviously, Serac and saying bye to him is huge in the first part. But I will say, when I rewatch it, I get kind of disappointed in the second part, because obviously Spock on The Next Generation should be a big deal in the episode. The second half, it doesn't feel as big as it should. It just kind of feels kind of like a generic episode.
There's a reason for that, actually, because it was only meant to be written as a single hour. And you can tell that they padded it out to a 2
Yeah, like getting to Spock. And part of that was they were still filming one of the movies, I think, or working on something, and they just had him for a day.
Yeah, that was...
That one is just so good.
Mark Leonard. So amazing.
That episode, those two move slowly for me. I kind of almost wish they had put it in one episode. I mean,
I agree, because the second part is just blown out.
And I feel like the Sela stuff is weak. Sorry, Sarah.
Like the story deserves 2 episodes. It's a big story. There just wasn't a lot of action for part of it. It just felt like, okay, let's resolve this.
And again, because it was originally conceived as an hour-long episode that was padded out to 2 hours, you also have to realize it aired in November of 1991, which is around the 25th anniversary of Star Trek in general.
There we go.
Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, was coming out literally a month later. All of this was coming together as like this big celebration of Star Trek. So it had also, November is Sweeps Week, which I don't know if you know anything about Sweeps Week, but it's the thing where in broadcast networks do big things like 2-parters to make a case that their shows should continue to stay on the air and they can charge big bucks for their advertisers. So even though it's padded out 2-part episode, but they did it because they wanted the money.
Michael, I was going to say all of that stuff, and then as...
Oh, sorry.
No, fine, that's great, but I'll add that as probably the person who remembers watching this live the best. How's that? This was a big damn deal when Leonard Nimoy was going to be on this, because if you recall, and we kind of talked about it in our first season discussion, people were real skeptical about The Next Generation. Well, when Leonard Nimoy blessed The Next Generation with his presence, even if it was a day away of shooting The Undiscovered Country, it was a big thing. And I remember gasping when they would show the preview for the next episode, because I was younger, there weren't like spoiler magazines, the internet did not exist. This was a huge big thing, and yeah, it moves maybe slowly in retrospect. It's kind of like Star Trek's Phantom Menace in a way, because it's all politics and no action, and maybe an annoying character or two.
And it's also setting up the fact that this whole plot line, Spock is going to waste like the next 35 years of his life, and it won't matter at all.
We don't know that, though. We did not know that when the episodes aired, and that's what's important. So I really like the unifications, because I think it was a smart kind of... This is the whole universe coming together. It was for the anniversary. Gene Roddenberry had just passed away. They had done all this stuff came together in one big wall, and they rate very highly from me. I'll just foreshadow that.
I still rated it highly. I'm just saying, like, as an original series fan, especially like as great as the Serac episode is, I remember I was like 6 or 7 when these aired, and I was already obsessed with the original series. So I remember like each night and then having to wait for the Spock episode after like being emotionally devastated by the first one as a little kid. And then I watched the Spock one and I was just like, oh, that's just okay. And then I went back to watching the movies.
Being 9 when this aired, I do remember watching it, and I was at my dad's house and seeing Leonard Nimoy come on TV at the very last shot. We weren't thinking like, oh, this is such a cop-out, he's only in the very last second of the episode. No, it was just like, yes, he's there, awesome! And then, of course, seeing Star Trek VI, like, in theaters, like, a month or so later, I mean, it was just like this, all of that did help me become like a huge Trekkie at this point. Like, this all is what feeds into my fandom.
Star Trek 6 that Michael Dorn is in as well.
Yes,
because he plays one of the Klingons at the Khitomer.
He plays
his own grandfather.
Yeah, he plays his own grandfather, Worf. Counselor Worf.
You can say that the padding out is a criticism if you want, and I'm part of that, saying, it's unfortunate they had to pad it out, and they didn't pad it out in better ways, but by padding it out, we get that amazing scene between Brent Spiner and Patrick Stewart on the Klingon Warbird, where they're just like, it's literally has nothing to do with the episode. Picard needs to sleep, the Klingons are trolling them by giving them a single berth, and a bunk, or whatever the word is, but and Picard's just like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. And Data's like, here, you can have the shelf, sir. And he falls asleep he's trying to fall asleep on the shelf, and Data's just standing behind him. And it's just absolutely beautiful character work between Brent Spiner and Patrick Stewart, and literally has nothing to do with the episode. It's clearly just a scene that they added because they needed to add a 5-minute thing for the episode. And yeah, I like that scene. It's funny.
That Klingon was played by Stephen Root, who like disappears into that role. It is awesome.
That's some. He's a. I mean, I hope you know, if you're a TV fan, you know who Stephen Root is. Just kind of one of those people that's been on a lot of different stuff, both as headliner or a regular role, or just appears on stuff. But he's really good. And you're talking about that scene. I thought you were going to see, for me, the cake, the creme de la creme, the cherry on top is Spock and Data's scene. On the Klingon Warbird, so you've got the trifecta of Star Trek all in one, and Data kind of analyzing in a meta, but also direct way, how they're similar and how they're different, which is what fans were looking at and saying all along.
And it is weird that this two-parter not only, like, is it the first J.J. Abrams movie that is a continuation from?
Did I say Warbird?
Oh yeah, Romulus is destroyed in the
Spock failed to stop the Nova in time, which Spock's plan is the whole reason Starfleet didn't save the Romulans with a fleet, because they're like, oh, Spock has this, and then the Nova destroys all the Romulans, and then that leads into the entire JJ split off timeline,
the Kelvin timeline.
And a little teaser, hopefully not a spoiler, but there is an episode of Star Trek in the future titled Unification 3. Which I really enjoyed, but we'll get to that in a couple of years.
At the rate we're going, truth. Anything else you want to say generally before we start going into our lists, where I'm sure more episodes will be highlighted and or dispiritedly discussed? That was alliterative. Hearing no objection, let's start with the worst list. We always like to start, poorly and end on a high note. Now, I don't know that there are poor episodes, although the 3 that I picked jumped out at me, but I guess the rest or some of you struggled. So who wants to go first, talking about what is the worst of season 5? Pick you! All right.
The more I look at it, the more that these can be, like, tied for the worst. They rotate. I don't know. The first one I'll mention is Jean Grey and Charles Xavier falling in love.
It's on mine.
Patrick Stewart is the reason she got cast as Jean Grey, because he worked with her on this.
Which is fine.
They weren't going to hire her.
That's fine. That's great. We saw the birth of later X-Men stuff. Great. But, Nick, why don't you like The Perfect Mate?
I don't like the writing of the episode. It's poorly written use of the Ferengi, which are always hard to write in a way that isn't annoying. Deep Space Nine does it the best and the worst, but this is one of those that isn't great. They're just annoying, and it's like, why are they allowed in that shuttle, or in the where the stupid thing is? I don't know. So that's annoying. I don't know if it's the directing, because Famke Janssen, I've seen her in not just X-Men, other stuff, where she does a really good job. And I get the bland portrayal because she takes on the other people she's with, but there are too many scenes where she's bland that makes it kind of boring to watch.
She wasn't an actress, though, when she was cast in this. They just picked her because she was a model. So she's probably learning.
That, but I said, Sarah, I was like, is this she gives off a model that they decided to cast because they wanted someone beautiful, because everyone is going to fall in love with her, Riker, even Worf. But it was just so weird with the miners, and then with Worf, where you actually see her with the personality doing something, and then everything else was so bland. I don't know. It just made for not the most entertaining episode, and also some of the writing, it was like, this is happening because we wrote it this way, instead of it feeling more natural like the rest of the episodes. So that's one of my least favorites. My other one is Cost of Living.
Which one's that?
Loxana and Alexander are hanging out in a mud bath.
I almost put that on my 3, but yeah, it's down there.
And as much as I love the guest stuff, I love Loxana. It's probably my least favorite episode with her.
Yeah.
But I do love Tony Jay, who is the person she's going to marry. That actor is great in a lot of things he does. He does a lot of voiceover too, because he had that distinctive deep voice. But that one's pretty annoying. and I don't really get what they're trying. I both get what they're trying to do and don't, and I don't know. The higher, the fewer. Who cares?
It's not on my bottom 3, but I only like it, again, because I love Luoxana Troy, and I like, again, the interesting dynamic between her and Alexander. It's a fun dynamic that you wouldn't expect, and I think they do a good job with it.
It's not on his bottom 3, but he sounded a little defensive, nevertheless.
I love Sarah's face right now. No one can see it, but the look on her face is just like, really? Honestly? Who are you?
It's just a frustrating episode as a parent, because I feel like Worf is constantly undermined. He's just trying to get the kid to pick up his dang socks. Like, oh, and she's like whisking him off to a mud bath. Like, no.
I do hate that he calls his dad sir.
It's awkward all around. Everything. That one scene where Tony J's like, no, you have to stay here. She's like, can't I just leave for a half hour? And then they just sneak out of the room. Oh, it's so weird. I don't know.
Oh, are they naked in the mud bath? Because that's not right.
She probably is. I mean, you know.
I mean, if Beta Zeds are naked when they get married, I have a feeling they are not very... Their sense of nudity and is not like humans.
It is cute at the end where Worf's in the mud bath, but he has to be up to his chin because they didn't want to do makeup on any other part of his body. So he's like sunk all the way up.
Which is probably why I didn't put it on my bottom 3. There are moments of humor in the episode, but I agree that of the Luoxana Troy ones, it's probably my least favorite of hers. And I'm not a parent, but I feel Sarah's frustration because, you know, Deanna was already working real hard with Worf and Alexander. They've got some adjustment issues. Worf's a single dad. He's a busy security chief on a starship. You know, live and let live, Luoxana. It's not all about you, is all I'm saying.
I can't wait to hear Nick's other bottom 3 episode.
It is. You know what I don't need to see on Star Trek? Every character orgasming into space while they play the game.
Oh. I was like, which one was that? Oh, right.
I made a face like, what? Where are you going with this here, Nick?
That's what they're doing. It's horrible. I don't care for it. I don't buy that they all... I don't know. I didn't buy it. I do love, and I wish the character kept coming back. I loved...
Robin Leffler, played by Ashley Judd.
Yeah, I enjoyed that character. I enjoyed Wesley coming back. That just wasn't... There also are so many kids on the ship that it is confusing to me how the game worked throughout the entire ship on everyone. But
well, if you like Robin Leffler, you should read Peter David's Star Trek book series, New Frontier, because her character features prominently in that book series. And frankly, everyone should read it if you're a fan of Star Trek, because it is one of the greatest Star Trek adjacent book series of, Peter David. Amazing.
That's some bold words. And I don't mind the game. I like the game because of Wesley's return, but I don't need to know no more about Robin Leffler. They dropped that relationship like a rock, so who cares?
They did. They totally did.
I should go because my list is very similar.
What? Shocking!
My most hated episode is The Cost of Living. I just think it was very clunky. And I love what they were trying to do is like have this lonely old lady be friends with Alexander, but it just got creepy to me. And now my second least favorite was The Perfect Mate. I think it is dull. It is just dull and not done well. And I think Famke Janssen was just not directed well. But I don't know if I blame the director or her inexperience or whatever. It could have been maybe a little better, but I just don't need it. My third place winner is The Outcast.
Which one's that?
So this is an episode where there's a genderless society.
Yeah.
And this individual identifies as female, but that's not allowed.
Soren is the name. Yes.
I dislike two things about it. I don't like her and Riker. I don't think it built in an appropriate way. I mean, it just all of a sudden kind of felt like they just used Riker. Riker needed a story. Let's use Riker. He's great with the ladies. And this individual was working with him. I don't know. It was hard. And then there's this whole confrontation scene. And I don't know. I think it's disappointing how it ended. Like, I think maybe I'm looking at it through today's sensibilities, but in the end, this Soren got the therapy and decided to be the one gender again. And I don't know. It's just really, I don't know.
So
it's a classic cop-out ending for episodic television. You need to end the episode. There's no ongoing character arc, so you need to wrap it up in a nice, tidy little bow. And that's the way it does it here. And I don't like it either. But I'm actually rather surprised that you do not like that episode. I was not expecting that one.
Doesn't leave me feeling that people were represented or heard. It wrapped it up with how people want to wrap up.
I guess I feel like it hits really hard that they forced the therapy on her, and I feel like that might have sunk in more in the day of what was happening, and it might have left people thinking a little bit more about something that we're still dealing with. There's a couple things that this addresses. I don't know what exactly their intentions were, but it definitely hits gay conversion therapy, and it also hits some, I guess, trans issues, but just the spectrum of gender and how we look at it. And this is a hard one to watch in today, but knowing Star Trek and some of what you get out of it, I really appreciate what they're doing and what they're really making people think about back in a time. Like, we still have people who just don't understand, don't care to understand, and rather live in ignorance and even hate. So I do appreciate this episode exists in the early 90s of television.
Barely the 90s, and so that's kind of what gets back into context. So we've talked in previous episodes related to Star Trek and certainly The Next Generation about the franchise's struggle with LGBTQIA identities. And I feel like this was the show's first real, or the franchise's first real attempt to tackle that in a way that would get around sort of network interference, but also balance the competing attitudes of the day. And again, this was progressive back then. We keep looking at these shows with today's lens, and I get it, your reaction can change, and I'm not going to judge you for that. But with this particular episode, it is uncomfortable to watch. It's deliberately uncomfortable to watch. They're trying to make you reason through what this looks like when the tables are reversed, basically. When the majority of society has one view and the minority of society has the view that we would traditionally have, and how that plays out, while then tacking on to it the whole idea of a very on-the-nose allegory for conversion therapy. It's all of it. It's gender identity, it's sexual preference, it's all of it rolled up into one. It's very complex, but back then, TV did not deal with the nuances and complexities that today's society deals with. So I'm not going to fault you for not liking it, but I do think it's a strong episode on this season only because it was kind of risky for them in 1991.
Yeah, I like the scene between Riker and Soren early on in the episode where he makes the slip of saying he uses the masculine pronoun, and Soren corrects him and says, we don't have a masculine pronoun. And it's a very progressive, and he immediately is like, you're right, I'm sorry. What pronoun should I use? Well, we have a pronoun, but it doesn't really translate in your language. So, and he's like, you know what? I will try my best. And if a slip up happens again, I apologize. It's very progressive. Even more so now when people make a big deal out of pronouns, and they should be a big deal, but I mean, like, they make a big deal in the negative sense.
I think two things could have made it better for me, the viewer. One, if it wasn't Riker. I wish it was Geordi or even Data or some. I just felt like Riker is such a Lothario that maybe that's not the right word.
No, it might seem hollow to use him, even though he's, yeah.
And I didn't necessarily see the connection between them. And so I don't know, that was hard for me that it was him. But the other thing was, I wish at the end when that Soren was like, now I'm happy. I think they were trying to show us that she had been programmed and brainwashed or whatever. But I think it would have been stronger if like she wanted to stay and everything was fine, but they cut away, but then saw her from a window, like looking sad, or like showing us that like this conversion therapy isn't good. It is sad. It is ruining her identity. I don't know. Again, I know I'm looking at it from today's sensibilities, but it just isn't enjoyable for me to watch that episode, I guess. I think the acting was really good. They purposely used women because the producers felt like if they used a male actor that it would be hard for the audience to see them romantically with Riker, which I thought is still very homophobic. But
well, that's also why I think they used Riker. I mean, you're pointing to all of the potential reactions of the time, and Riker would have been the most relatable. I'm just gonna say it out: the most relatable straight male on the show. Putting him in that situation, so could it have been handled better? I don't know. I like it. I don't necessarily believe that he falls in love with her so quickly. I think that writing payoff is not well done. But I also think it expands on Riker's depth, which they try to do in this season particularly, and in the next season. I also think it's just trying to... I think they were just going straight for allegory with nothing more. No fancy bells and whistles. This is what it is. This, we're going to tackle this topic. We're going to put it all here. Here's our offering for it. So it's not necessarily artful, but it is what it is.
I almost feel like they wanted the most hyper-masculine character on the show in order to be the contrast, in order to show the gender contrast. Like, she identifies as female, so you need that contrast with the hyper-masculine character. I mean, although I do like the idea that Geordi might have been an interesting dynamic there if he had been the one, especially since the reason they're even paired up together is that it feels like it's a more engineering... It feels like engineering expertise would have been more obvious choice rather than the command. You know what I mean? Because
he was piloting the shuttlecraft. That's why he was.
True, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, that I don't think it. Hyper masculine is basically what I'm saying without actually saying that. And I don't think the setup of why they had to be together fell short. If it was Geordi, I don't think it would have changed the story though either.
I don't think so.
I think it was a device.
The story. I just think the connection wasn't there for me, and it seemed really...
One of the reasons a little hard with Riker is that we all know that he belongs with and ends up with Troy. Anytime either of them feel like they're in love with someone, there's a little bit of, well, that's not the right person.
Right.
Anyway, that's my list. Enjoy it.
Thanks, Sarah.
I mean, I have some other ones I don't like that well. I'm going to wait and see if anyone else brings them up.
Okay.
I'll go next. So I had a real hard time with the bottom three. There's just so many good episodes, and rewatching them, I'd be like, oh, I bet this is one I'm going to hate. Nope. I watch it again, think, oh, wow, this is good. And then I get really involved in it. So I think the only reason I'm choosing these is probably for rather arbitrary reasons. My most least favorite of the three, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
I think I'm going to go with, it's a toss-up between, I'm going to mention both of them. It's a toss-up between Violations and Conundrum. Conundrum,
What?
oh, interesting. Which one? Sarah's making a face at me right now. What's the one that you're making a face about, Conundrum or Violations?
Conundrum.
Conundrum?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so this is the only arbitrary reason I might put it on there, is because I think Clues in season 4 does it better. It's a mystery episode. They don't know what's going on. They have to figure out the mystery. Their memories are wiped, and they have to relearn their dynamics. And but in my opinion, Clues does it better, because the mystery of trying to figure out what happened to their unconsciousness for 30. Well, they think it's only 30 seconds, but it ends up being longer than that. To me, that episode does this exact same premise way better. Plus, I don't like the Riker dynamic. That just seems so weird. It's only saved for me in the end because of that one scene between Troy and Ro and Riker, which I just love that scene. But it's just, and to me, the setup of McDonough, who's the alien, who's the entire perpetrator of this entire plot of wiping the memories and using the ship to destroy this this race that they're at war with, that McDuff's race is at war with. To me, it's so obvious from the very beginning because he doesn't show up in the teaser after their memory's wiped. They're like, what's going on? What's going on? And suddenly there's this character you've never seen before. And it's like, why are you important, McDuff? You're the executive officer. Okay, I guess that's somewhat plausible, but it just seems so obvious from the very beginning that obviously he's the one that is not supposed to be there, so there's something wrong here. I don't know.
I would advocate that McDuff being obvious is the point, and that I think Conundrum is actually clues plus the naked time / now equals this episode.
There you go. There's good dynamics in the episode. I like the idea of Worf being like, well, obviously I'm a well-decorated officer, so I should be the captain of the ship, and he takes control, and Picard being sort of like, well, he knows that he's more diplomatic in nature, so he takes a more subordinate role on the ship at first before they figure out what the real dynamic is, and then Worf has to apologize. I do like that. There are certain things I do like about it. It just, I don't know. Again, in my opinion, Clues does it better, so it's a really arbitrary reason to put it on my bottom three.
I think
like
this one's
Clues
just
is
about
so
comedy.
different.
Yeah, it's so different. Clues is played more for drama. Conundrum is played more for comedy. Even the punchline is comedic because they far outman McDuff's whatever thing they go to destroy.
And in this one, they're living with a lack of memory.
Right.
Whereas Clues, they don't know. So the whole episode is them trying to figure out who they are. And then an awesome insight to all the characters, because we see them at their base. Like, Picard is this amazing diplomatic captain, and how he handles Worf without his memories is amazing. And Worf's moments of making decisions, and they all have those moments. I mean, even Riker and Ro being like, we're going to head off. And then Geordi awkwardly going, I'm going to come with you. Like, I don't know. I just thought it was it's one of my favorite episodes of this whole season.
I love Data as the bartender.
Yeah.
That was hilarious. I will admit that.
And they're like, you are actually the science officer. It's fun.
So, I think that's why I brought up Violations, too, is because Violations is the episode where Troy is, I guess I'm going to say it, mind raped. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but when I was a kid and this episode originally aired, my dad taped it off of TV, and we literally played this episode like 5-10 times in a single weekend. And I don't know if it was because he was I don't know if it was because he couldn't get Channel 3, which was the local affiliate that was airing it, and so we were trying to salvage the episode because we couldn't get the channel that well, so we kept trying to make we'll be able to salvage the rest of this episode even though it's all fuzzy and snowy from old broadcast analog times. So we just played it over and over again. And the beginning of the episode with Troy being mind raped by that, I was going to use a terrible word for the character, but I can't because it's a G-rated podcast.
PG. Maybe PG-13.
That scene where she's being mind raped lives in my brain from my childhood. I don't know if it affected me in a terrible way, but maybe it did. But rewatching it, it's just like, oof. Maybe this one will be my least. Maybe this one's my number 3, and you're slowly convincing me that Conundrum's better than I'm putting it in there. I think the only reason I brought it up is because I think Clues does a better job. But anyway, so, yeah, I didn't want to watch, just for the record, I didn't want to watch this episode 5 million times. It's just that I do remember that very vividly. We played it over and over again, and it's lived in my brain ever since. The other two, though, for my bottom 3 list, the one that's just sort of a meh episode for me is Imaginary Friend, which is the episode about the little girl who has an imaginary friend, and it turns out the imaginary friend is an alien who is starting to, wreak havoc on the ship. And, it's just kind of a meh episode for me. I like kids on Star Trek The Next Generation. Usually the children, whenever they bring them in, it's fun to see the dynamic between the adults and the children, seeing as that this whole show was designed to be a family show with families on the ship. that was one of its core themes throughout the whole series, is like that dynamic between Starfleet and family. But for whatever reason, this is just a meh episode for me, so I think it's on my bottom 3 for that reason. And my least favorite episode of this season, and possibly one of my least favorite of the entire series, is the wretched, awful game. Ugh, it's so... I mean, if you are a Wesley Crusher hater, this episode does not help. Because this just basically, literally, I mean, he doesn't save the day, really, but he's trying to save the day. It's really Data that comes in and saves the day. But really, Wesley Crusher is the one that saves the day, because he's the one that brings Data back online in order for Data to zap everyone with the beacon. So, I mean, it's just like, if you hate Wesley Crusher, this episode does not help your case, because it basically just goes back to season 1 of like, oh yeah, he's doing the exact same thing he always does. Save the day because he's a genius kid. Plus the whole game, the special effects are terrible. I mean...
What do you want?
And let's
91!
use our brain to put a ball in the cone.
This was before Windows 95. Settle down. This isn't Minesweeper, Michael.
And I don't buy the fact that literally every single crew member, including Picard, I don't buy the fact that Picard would be into video games at all. Maybe he was forced, but it's just the fact that, no, I wish there had been more characters on this show that resisted somehow, or at least incapacitated in a different way, so they couldn't be. But just like literally every single character, I guess they were going for a horror movie aspect, I guess, in some way. But it just, no, to me, this is terrible television and terrible Star Trek.
But the mental image of Captain Picard playing Pong just happened, and that was delightful. No, he wouldn't be into video games, but you have to believe...
Well, here's the thing. You have to remember, though, before he was stabbed in the heart, he was highly competitive.
Right.
That is true.
So you can look at it as that's something he can still do, that, like, the old him, who always wanted to win, would be into.
And he was convinced by his secret crush, Dr. Beverly Crusher, who was the one that kept making everybody play the game.
And also, it's just like such a veiled drug addiction allegory that was so obvious at this time, because it's 1991 or 1992, and we're
losing the war on drugs.
Yeah, we're losing the war on drugs. We're trying
kids.
to perpetuate Nancy Reagan's legacy by doing a drug PSA for an hour.
Oof. Follow that.
I know, Michael's got feelings that are not the elation brought on by the game.
Alright, so my bottom 3, and like I said, I don't hate these episodes. Most of them are because they focus on characters I just don't love as much as the other characters. So
you're going to hate every single Troy episode. Got it.
And every single Wesley episode.
Ensign Rowe.
Oh,
Mostly because
surprising.
That character didn't catch on. And at this point, until Deep Space Nine with Sisko and them, I didn't really care about the Bajorans or the Cardassians yet. That came much later. Deep Space Nine would tackle these issues far better. And, they had the breathing room to do it, but I also like those actors better.
Yes, they're known as the Bajora, without the N.
Then, Cost of Living, because I'm not a big fan of Alexander, and I'm not a huge fan of Luxwana, so pairing those characters, it just didn't work for me. And then number 1 is First Duty, because I just, as we've already covered, I don't care about what
You like the game better than First Duty?
It's more fun.
Oh.
Here's the thing, I'm not a real big fan of Starfleet, Academy, showing that. I don't care about that as much. I don't care about their school, as those stories don't interest me. There's other series that mention that, and book series about it, and I don't really care. And so that's probably an aspect of it, too, that lost me. Like I said, but though it's not a terrible episode. Even Wesley episodes, I would rate that like highest amongst them. But in this season, it just has to be on my bottom list.
The variations are great. Now, luckily, 2 of mine have already been mentioned, so there's more agreement in the worst than I thought there would be. My best of the worst, or the third of the worst, is The Perfect Mate. And not just because it's boring, but because my instant reaction was, is this some sort of trying to be fancy Prime Directive argument? Or is this some male writer's fantasy come to life? Because really, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, what if we had an alien that conformed to whatever man she was around? And then have Famke Janssen play it. So, to me, it plays very awkwardly. Now, redeemingly, she's paired with Patrick Stewart for most of the episode, and that is good. And maybe the reason why she's so, I guess, flat or two-dimensional is because she's bonding to him. But for me, there's a lot of problematic things with The Perfect Mate. It's almost like, okay, we did the Outcast, so just to make sure people don't get too squidgy, let's have something that will maybe appease those who might be upset about the Outcast with The Perfect Mate. So I don't love that episode. I don't hate it. It works out fine. It ends up being an interesting thought experiment, but let's just be real. That's what it was. Male writer's fantasy come to life. Number 2, nobody has mentioned. This one is Power Play. To me, it's like a repurposed Return to Tomorrow from the original series. That's exactly what it reminds me of. This is when Troy, O'Brien, and Data are all possessed by... I don't mind it, but I guess when I was watching it in this last rewatch, because keep in mind I've watched the series a number of times, it just struck me as this is Return to Tomorrow. This is Return to Tomorrow, next gen style. And maybe probably the most redeeming feature of it, or the things that I like about it, are like Miles and Keiko, because it's scary and stuff like that. But it just felt non-original to me. And Troy is the leading one, when maybe it would have been more fun to have Data be the leading one. I don't know. I don't have any strong feelings. I just don't really like it as much.
When I say I like it, it's not like my top by any means. And you know what is really annoying? And this is not meant to be mean against babies, because I love babies. But that baby cries the whole time, and I want to lose my damn mind. Oh, sorry. Do you have to bleep that word out?
No, you don't. But interesting coming from a mom.
I think that's what it is. And I know they were trying to amp up the dynamic that Miles was like, can't you shut that kid out, or Data or whoever. But I was like, it is really annoying because I can't focus on the dialogue. All I hear is this baby crying. Get a pacifier, get something. Anyway.
Yeah, and it just ends in kind of a flat note, okay, we can't do much, but we'll be put to rest and blah, blah, blah. I don't know, it's fine. Number 1 for me is Violations, the mind rape episode. And really it just comes down to, so it would have been an artfully done episode, but for 2 things. He has to sexually assault her inside the mind rape. So with Deanna Troi specifically, he assaults her by throwing her down on the floor and coming on top of her, as opposed to Riker or Crusher that have more digging back into memories and repurposing them. So that just felt like, are you trying to drive something home here? It was weird. And then I don't like the way it ends. After all of the rooting out of who this could be, it just kind of ends there, and not a lot of discussion, not a lot of trauma revisitation. This could be a little bit of today's lens, but it just, even back then, if we were talking about that kind of subject, there would be a little bit of rounding out of, well, here's how we can help you. And the counselor was one of the people who was getting the treatment, and was she going to go get counseling? This is what I wanted to know.
There's got to be another counselor.
I hope so, but I just don't think this one is... I think this one was a good idea that is very clunkily executed. And if they had done Troy's a little bit differently and rounded out the episode a little bit better, it might have actually been a really good commentary on the subject. As it is, it just turns out it feels worse than maybe it should, and it probably will feature in my bottom 10 worst of the whole series, just because I don't think it does the topic it was trying to do well.
This was weird to me. So he blames it on his own father.
Right.
Presumably they interview the father. We don't see that. We don't see any of that. We don't see the father and the mother like realizing, oh, it had to be our son, that they probably had to suspect of other times. I wish we could have seen that and them saying, oh my gosh, we're so sorry, it's him. It just ended, and the dad was like, well, we're gonna go on, and I don't know, you're right, it was very abrupt at the end, and I don't know.
This was low on my list as well.
Yeah, it's not one of my favorites.
They made Troy the chick again in this one, and it just was, I don't know, I didn't love it.
And weirdly enough, since we're talking about it, like, they repeat the same thing in the movie Star Trek Nemesis.
Yes, they do.
And she had a big problem, Troy. Marina Sirtis had a big problem. Like, she didn't even want to do the movie, but she was contractually obligated. Like, once she got the script, she was really disappointed and really mad. And yeah, it's terrible.
You know, it's been a while since I've seen Nemesis. I'm going to have to rewatch that, because I don't remember that.
I've only watched it twice. It's not good.
It does that character a huge disservice, especially since, like, that's, like, thank God for Picard, because if that's the last time we'd seen her, like, that's really insulting.
Agreed. But that, it is, and it's almost like an afterthought of how they do it. And it's like, it's just, like, it's so sad that they do struggle with how to write women characters for this show, especially compared to how much better they are with Dax, Kira, Janeway going on. That it stinks that they're the last movie where they've had the most time and they could get the best. I don't know. I would assume they can get the best writers. That's what they do for Troy. I did not care for that either.
Yeah. So this
also, there's some weird implications with that episode where it's like, so the guy is taking memories of something that actually happened in each of their lives. Yes, we know that he's able to manipulate those memories for his own liking by inserting himself and then inserting his father into the memory. But then there's almost like, wait a minute, is there a moment in Riker and Troy's past where he kind of forced himself on her? Maybe? I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that the cutaway is very clearly if I'm going to speak in today's parlance or in a technical parlance, there's clearly a point at which it's consensual up to a point at which it is not. And in that switch, you see the actor change. I think they do that well. I don't think they're inferring that Riker ever actually did anything of that nature with Troy. I think it very much is, it starts off as a loving, it's going to be sensual, and then it turns into something forceful. But what you're talking about is something that is not consented to, is a violation.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You don't actually need to go there. You can just take that subject. That's the allegory you're trying to hit anyway. Why be so on the nose? Take that one out. You know, Rikers and Crushers were really good kind of repurposing. Why couldn't they have done that also for Deanna? That just is the part that I really hate the most, actually, about the whole episode.
No, I agree. I mean, and it sucks that she's one of my favorite characters on the show, and this is one of the weirdest, and in a weird way, this is the memory that lives in my brain, is that scene. It's like, why, just because I happened to watch it so many times when I was younger, and it's really, it's just weird. I can't, again, I had no control over that. It was just the way my dad did it. So whatever, I don't know.
Okay, so we'll recommend some nice, good episodes that maybe you should put on repeat here, just to help you get your brain readjusted. Let's move to our best list. I'm very interested to hear all the variations because I'm predicting there will be.
I don't know if we want to go in the same order, but I started talking, so there you have it.
Oh, Nick.
This was tough because, like, a top 3 out of this season is yikes. And if the next time I rewatch this, I could shuffle. And then, because there are really good ones. This season does a lot of good, like, oh, this is what Star Trek is about type of episodes. So I'll just throw it out there for Michael. My number 4 was Conundrum. So it was pretty high up on my list. But my number 3 is Dharmak. It really stands out. It's also, it's pretty different for a Star Trek episode, but it's also like, why isn't stuff like this happening all the time with them exploring new civilizations? So I really enjoy that. I enjoy the Enterprise trying to communicate too. When we do cut to that, them trying to figure out what is going on from that end. But I really, like we already said, Paul Winfield and Patrick Stewart, them working together, and clearly it has staying power. Like, this episode still resonates. I've heard of, there's examples out there of people use this in different English classes as a teaching device, and it's still pretty entertaining to rewatch. So, Dharmak.
There was some great quotes in that episode, especially meme-ified quotes.
All right, my number 2 is, I don't know if anyone was going to say more about Dharmak.
Well, I will say that I agree, and it will feature on my list.
I will say that I am sorry, but that episode annoys me to watch, and it's on my list of good ones. It's not in my top 3, but I'm like, Nick, why doesn't that guy try to understand Picard? Why is Picard the only one trying to understand? And Nick's like, shut up, you're ruining this. Let's watch it. But I get frustrated by it. That's all I'm going to say.
Sarah's spicy.
I recognize that it's a good episode, but I don't find it that enjoyable to watch, I guess, personally. But
so there you go, Nick.
The walls fall.
Choco and the walls fell. True.
Number 2 is, man, I love this, and I love other shows that do this type of episode well, cause and effect. I really enjoy that one. We've already talked about it, but I love that it does start with it being Beverly figuring it out, because they overutilize Beverly as the one in the room that asks the questions on the sake of the audience member, which it kind of makes sense because she's the doctor when they're talking about engineering stuff. But I'm glad she gets this episode of kind of scientific methoding it and getting ahead of it and bringing the crew in. But I like that it isn't her episode. I like that it's the crew and everything I already said about cause and effect. And it just still is so fun that Kelsey Grammer is in an episode of Star Trek, especially because B.B. Newer was in one not that long ago.
And Frasier.
And then my favorite one for this season, because it also has, it both is pretty important to Star Trek lore in general, going into the future and reaching into past episodes, but it is such core sci-fi, or at least why I love sci-fi, and that's I, Borg. I mean, the title comes right from an Asimov short story, I, Robot, and it's telling a similar story in a different way. It's using an enemy instead of just a robot to hey, just because we don't think, or it's convenient to think that this isn't a person, that doesn't mean we should treat them like this or in this way. And that goes all the way back to the roots of why I love science fiction and its use of metaphor. So I just think I, Borg does such a good job, and the stuff they pull from this, not just for 7 of 9, but into the show Picard, is all worth it and hinges on performances in this episodes, but the relationships and the story they start telling in this episode. So I, Borg, number 1 for I, Nick.
I will go next because 2 of the episodes you just mentioned are on my top 3. So
there's not that much variation.
For me, my number 3 is the one that is not the one that you mentioned. My number 3 is The Inner Light. The Inner Light is I think, largely thought of as one of the best episodes of Star Trek in the entire canon. And I certainly agree with that stance. I mean, seeing Patrick Stewart play out this whole life in a matter of 20 minutes, although to him it's 30, 40 years, and just seeing him play off all these characters, seeing him eventually let go of his old life and become part of this community. And it's really heartbreaking because to me, it really plays into his character, one of his ongoing arcs of the idea of he chose crew and Starfleet and he could have had a family if he wanted to, but he didn't because he chose his duty. And maybe he's not really a family man because he's more solitary and more, just wants to be, he's a bit of an ambivert in the sense that he is really good at being a diplomat, an extroverted diplomat at first, but really in the end, he just wants to go back to his quarters and enjoy hot Earl Grey tea and kick back with a classic book of literature. But to see him in that family dynamic, you could see that little tiny inkling in the back of his head. It's like, well, yeah, if given the chance, he probably would have been a good family man if he had been able to have that family. And so in Star Trek Generations, which comes out right after the series ends, there's that, you kind of come back to that with him, because you see his family in that movie, in the Nexus, and of course you learn of the fact that his nephew dies in the movie. Spoiler alert. But so I feel like there's a bit of an ongoing theme with his character of family and giving up family for his duty, and I think this episode really illustrates that very well. And I like the fact they don't overplay the bridge scenes of them trying to bring Picard back. And I think the episode would have worked perfectly if they didn't have any bridge scenes and they just had the bridge scene at the end explaining, oh, you were unconscious for 20 minutes and what happened? And it's like, well, I lived this entire life and I just learned about the civilization. And if you had no bridge scenes and it was just this whole story of him living out this life, I think it would have worked great as an episode. But that's my number 3, because I think it's just great. My number 2 is Borg. I think there's some Emmy caliber acting on that episode. Whoopi Goldberg as Guinan is freaking amazing in that episode. She has, first of all, it's so great to see her in the position of, not really the quote-unquote wrong position of being against the Borg and wanting to see them destroyed and being okay with that, but you don't expect her to be in that position because she's usually the listener who's the sage advice giver. But now suddenly she has this very strong belief that, yeah, actually, Picard's right. You should take this opportunity to bring down the Borg and destroy them once and for all. But then once she finally starts talking to Hugh, suddenly she's like, I don't know, there's just such great acting in that scene where she's so fierce and absolutely just set in her ways. And then suddenly you hear that turn where she's like, oh, wait, you are an individual. And Patrick Stewart's acting is phenomenal. I think this is one of, just like all of the actors in that episode are phenomenal. It's a fantastic story, a really great way of dealing with that. And my absolute favorite, this is primarily a nostalgia choice, but my absolute favorite is Cause and Effect. Because again, I remember watching this episode live. I remember trying to figure out what the heck is going on with it. Why are they in a time loop? What the heck is a time loop? But they're doing the same thing over and over again. What on earth? And just reliving the episode now, even though I've seen it 4 or 5 times. It's so much fun to watch. Plus, they blow up the Enterprise. And blowing up the Enterprise is just kind of weirdly fun because it happens a lot in the movies, and when it happens it's kind of a big deal. So that's my personal favorite, but again, it's just mostly a nostalgia pick.
Wow, 2 for Cause and Effect. It's not on my list. It's not that it's not good, it's just not on my list.
So Cause and Effect is my 3rd. I really like that episode. I love Kelsey Grammer, and he rocks the Monster Maroon movie uniform really well. It's just good sci-fi. The episode I just think is really well done. And then I would say Borg, because of how much I love all of the Borg storyline. And it kind of goes back to classic Star Trek where no enemy is 100% your enemy. Go back to the Romulan Kirk episodes, the Klingon episodes. They always played with this idea of, yeah, they look like you can have this mindset that they're just going to destroy you and your entire way of life, but it's always deeper than that. It's never that cut and dry. And I love Star Trek episodes that go back to that. I mean, to me, that's the core of the universe, is there's common ground everywhere. And then I tied Unification parts 1 and 2. I see that as one episode. You can't watch the first part and not watch the second part.
Agreed.
And I absolutely love the character of Sarek. I love him in the movies. And, I mean, they keep going back to him in Discovery and in the JJ movies. That character resonates. And this is a fitting end. And pairing him with Picard just works. They kind of feel like they're 2 characters of, similar souls. And just, it's a pairing I wouldn't have ever thought of. And the writers just did such a great job with it.
Wow, 3 with Cause and Effect.
And Borg.
Well, yeah, I kind of expected Borg to feature highly. But let's see what Sarah has to say.
I gave Borg an honorable mention. It's my 4th place. I like it.
Okay.
But my 3rd place is Time's Arrow.
The
I really
I haven't mentioned that one yet. I love that episode.
I almost didn't put it because it is a two-parter that straddles the seasons. And it is hard to watch one without the other, but it's so intriguing. So this is the one where they find Data's head in a cave, but it's been there since like the early 19th century. Immediately you're like, what? Like, what happened here? And I forgot why it was there. Like I said to Nick today, why is this head there? Like I just couldn't remember, and I liked that I got to like go on that journey again. And it gets very steampunky, and I like it. I love a good temporal mechanics.
It was painful for me to leave that episode out of my Tom 3 because that's one of my favorite time travel episodes of the series.
Well, I put it on your behest, so there you go.
Thank you.
My number two.
I just watch Jerry Hardin play Mark Twain forever. Whether you think it's a good performance or not, it is entertaining.
I can't. This is the one time that all I can think of is that's Jerry Hardin. I can't not do it.
Like I can't tell if he has on a lot of makeup or no makeup at all. I don't know what they did here. Like it was very specific.
So
he makes is awesome.
He's so distinctive. I mean, I'm sure that's a very fine Samuel Clemens performance, but he's just so distinctive. I love the episode, don't get me wrong, but him specifically, it's just like I cannot suspend disbelief on him, unfortunately.
Are you referring to the fact that he played Deep Throat on the X-Files?
That, but also a bunch of other stuff. He's just got a very distinctive voice and distinctive gait and distinctive look. So
He wasn't Deep Throat, wasn't he? X?
No, he was Deep Throat.
Okay, well,
I literally looked it up because I was like, wait a minute, who was he?
X was the guy on 21 Jump Street.
Who they originally cast Admiral Nechayev as, there's a deleted scene where they recorded her as X first. We'll see Admiral Nechayev more on Deep Space Nine. But she's a next gen, a couple ones.
You also get a really good Guinan in this one, and I always like ones where Guinan knows what's going on and nobody else does. That's always amusing. So my number 2 is The Inner Light. I think it is so beautiful, but I guess, I don't know, it's not your typical Star Trek. There's not a lot of action, and so I could see if some people didn't like it, but I like how his wife is like, well, it took him a really long time to get over it. And I don't think he ever forgot that he was Picard, but he couldn't even, like, move on for a really long time. And
it took 5 years, in his experience.
And it was so realistic. And I don't know. I just really like it. You get his son playing his son. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love that kind of thing? And it's just so beautiful. And it will come back again and again with the flute. And I don't want to spoil or anything, but we even see a little bit in Picard where that comes back in the theme song.
Yes.
I literally just I read about that. I was like, what? That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was my number 2. My number 1 is Cause and Effect. I really love that episode. I think it's so great. I already went on and on about it, but I just love a problem that we all have to solve episode. Monster of the Week, kind of, that's my thing. Problem of the Week, let's just get in there and do it.
I am the only one that's not less Cause and Effect. I like it.
Well, there's any good ones that, my list has Dharmak on it, The Next Phase, which we didn't talk about, but that's where there's that.
I know, it's crazy. We haven't talked about that one yet.
I have some honorable mentions that are going to hit some stuff, so you know me, I can't just leave it there.
The Inner Light is such a beautiful episode of television in general, but it's also crazy how good it is, and really our whole main cast, they don't actually do anything. We're just really watching Patrick Stewart in this play. You almost forget about the mystery. You're just watching him live this life, and it is beautiful. And there's this great moment at the end, and I don't think it would have worked with anyone other than Patrick Stewart, like playing that part too. He just can really live in it and act it well. But yeah.
I actually kind of teared up when I watched it. And you know what? Confession, in the 30 years since this episode had aired and I knew of its reputation, I had actually never seen it until I binged this entire season. And this was my first airing. This is the first time I had ever seen The Inner Light. And I knew its reputation, but I just was like, okay, now I have to watch it before I record this episode because I know it's the one that everyone talks about, or one of the ones that everyone talks about. And I was just like, and because I'd never seen it, towards the end of the episode, I started tearing up a little bit because it was just so affecting the way seeing the civilization, not just his family, dying essentially because of the way the planet was dying, but like this whole civilization and realizing that, oh yeah, this is like passing on this civilization 1,000 years later, and they were just hoping somebody somewhere would eventually come along and be able to pass on their cultural memory, and it's just so great.
I wonder how different your life would be if you watched that once and Violations one less time.
Yeah, right? I know.
Nick.
I might be less neurotic and less messed up in the head.
I had to look up that actress that played his wife. Her name's Margot Rose, because she's so good. And I was like, she must be like the lead in something. She really just did a ton of television, like one episode, but she's in like everything. I think she just does such a great job. The end.
All right. Well, I can't do a list without honorable mentions. So I'm going to throw out The Game and First Duty because Wesley Crusher. But if I was going to pick one of those two, it would be First Duty, hands down. To me, that's the best Wesley Crusher episode of the whole series.
I agree with that one.
And it's
a good episode.
It's a good episode. It's a well-done courtroom drama on Star Trek. You're wrong, Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle's shaking his head no. He's like absolutely against it.
I know he is, but I still love it. I was always very excited when Will returned to the show after my childhood crush, Gordy LaChance, left and went on to do other things. Not very many of them, but other things. And so The Game is definitely the worst of the two. It is not age well. But at the time, it was kind of fun to see him. And it did launch Ashley Judd's career. That is one of her first acting things. So there you go. I also have The Next Phase. I'm so excited that you mentioned that, Sarah, because I really enjoyed that episode. So for the same reasons you all enjoy Cause and Effect or Conundrum, I like The Next Phase. It's kind of the same thing. You do have a pairing that's kind of broken off with Ro and Geordi. This is the one where they think they're dead and really they're just out of phase because the Romulans are experimenting with cloaking technology that takes people into a different phase, and it's just all a big thing. But they're helping the Romulans in this episode. They're trying to assist them while in the meantime they're being sneaky and Romulan-y and all the stuff that they do. And Geordi and Ro are together solving a problem. It's one of Geordi's best episodes, I think.
I agree with that, yeah.
And they get you. You almost believe that those are some good Romulans. They almost have you.
Yep.
But
then it just ends in a really fun way with they're all at their wake that Data has planned, and it's this big party, and they have to do this flooding of 10 Forward to make them appear back in phase, and there's a lot of, it's kind of like the Yar episode, but done better, because you get to have a lot more of their true reflections on the characters, and Data feeling his feelings that he doesn't really have, but we all almost always know that he does about Geordi, and I don't know, I just really like it. It's not in my top 3, but of the ensemble caper episodes, it's kind of my favorite.
Yeah, I agree with that one. That one would be like maybe your top 10 of the season.
Sarah found a fun fact that it was written as a bottle episode to save money, but then the effects ended up making it one of, if not the most expensive of the season.
Well, plus they had to go to a Warbird set.
They already had that set.
Oh, okay.
It was a redress of one that there's an earlier episode where they help the Romulans, and it's the exact same set.
I mean, I would assume it's probably also the same Warbird from Undiscovered Country.
Probably.
They did that all the time. If they were filming, it would literally be like one stage over.
This is the episode also where Moira Queen is the Romulan, since you've mentioned that. Susanna Thompson.
Kyle might like this. Nobody else will care. It reminds me of an Enterprise episode that we're going to get later. Where
a Hoshi?
Yeah.
Yep. I almost brought it up. I was like, I don't want people to be like, Kyle's talking about Enterprise again.
It reminds me of that one. So we'll come back to it in like 2 years when we get to that season of Enterprise.
It's yours and Sarah's special bond. Nobody's going to judge you. Okay. And then
I might like the show again. I'm just saying. I didn't watch it the first time. I might like it. You never know.
I think it's a lot more enjoyable like in the binge format than when it was like on UPN and waiting each week. I think it works better when you can watch multiple episodes.
Which we'll talk about when we get to the Enterprise chapter, which Kyle is moderating. Hooray! And then also in my honorable mentions, I have The Inner Light. It's not in my top 3. It very easily could be. I really love the episode. I think Michael described it very wonderfully and Sarah described it very wonderfully. It's very beautiful. But I did notice for the first time watching it that he plays a snippet of the Picard theme, which is now might be my favorite, if it's not one of my favorite themes of Star Trek shows. It's so beautiful. Like, I've listened to the soundtrack just to hear the Picard theme, and the fact that the flute is incorporated in it, and I didn't realize it, was a bit of an Easter egg that I was very excited to discover. So it's very wonderful. But I put it in my honorable mentions only because I tend to gravitate towards these next ones more strongly. At number 3, I have a tie. Dharmak, for the reasons Nick said. It sticks in my brain. I mean, from my first time through watching this show, Chaka When the Walls Fell, it's just one of the seminal Next Generation episodes. It's very Star Trek to me. And this one ages very, very well because it's basically at its root about communication and trying to bridge the gap of differences. And God, I wish people did that nowadays. In America! Okay? Never mind 2 alien species. But the fact that somebody would take such great lengths and ultimately self-sacrifice just to, even if the mechanics are a little weird, and why doesn't Dharmak try to learn English, and we could get into the whole universal translator and how does that really work. But the fact that he speaks in metaphor and that Picard actually has to figure that out, and then you have Paul Winfield being Dharmak, or whatever his name is, playing the character, and that's just a hark back to the Wrath of Khan. I think it's just a very Star Trek episode, and I love it. But I'm throwing one in at a tie that nobody's mentioned, and that's Ethics. This is the one where Crusher has to work with the other doctor to replace Worf's spine. And
weird we haven't mentioned it, honestly. I'm surprised Kyle didn't mention it.
It's one of my least favorite Worf episodes, and it contradicts a lot of Klingon lore that was already established by, like, the Bibles for the first series and at the start of this series for Klingon civilization. I get what they're trying to do and, like, the questions they're trying to raise for the warrior race, but I'm a big fan of keeping canon in mythology.
To me, the episode isn't about Worf. Worf is a device. To me, it's the conversation between the 2 doctors. This is, to me, one of Crusher's best episodes, if not the best episode. Because it gets into a medical, ethical argument about what is right and what is appropriate. And they do it on Star Trek, and maybe they have to bend some other rules to make it work because it's Klingons. But in the end, it's the dialogue that they're having. And it doesn't happen very often in Star Trek, which is interesting to me because in Star Trek, all the medical technology makes them able to do everything they want all the time. Nobody ever stops and asks, should they, as Dr. Ian Malcolm might say, except in this episode. And so I actually wanted to throw it up here because I'm riveted when the episode's on. I don't pay attention to the Klingon biology part. What I'm paying attention is what the 2 women are talking about. So I really like it, and that's why I threw it in as a tie. Number 2 for me is Iborg. Everybody has said the reasons why. It's so good. It's pure Star Trek episode where it asks you to identify your own prejudice and work within the confines of see yourself in the other person's shoes, no matter how hard that is, and consider how you'd want to be treated if the situation was reversed. That's all this episode is. But it's done with Borg. It's done with Patrick Stewart purposefully trying to provoke Hugh as Locutus of Borg.
That's a fantastic scene between
awesome
those
scene.
2 actors.
It's so good. Everything is so good. Whoopi Goldberg talking as Guinan to this actor. You already highlighted that scene. That is really good.
He only has one eye, and he's still an amazing, like, emoter.
Yeah.
He has 2 eyes, but on there, like, he's got that.
It's a holographic sticker.
It does look like that, doesn't it?
The writing is so good. The progression from the only person who the only one who doesn't take it for granted that this is an enemy, it goes from Crusher, and then Geordi is the in that makes sense, and it just logically goes to Guinan, and Guinan already has that connection to the Borg, because she would be closer to Crusher in this instance if it wasn't for the Borg. It's just, and then obviously Picard's connection to the Borg and Locutus. It's so good.
You gotta give Geordi credit. He may not be good with the ladies, but he is a really good friend. I would be his friend.
Oh, I think he's just good with machines. Hugh, Data.
He's got human friends. They're fine. Geordi's not as pathetic as you're implying just now. Okay.
I just think he's better with machines than people.
Okay. Well, Iborg is fantastic Star Trek, and I'd be surprised if it's not in my personal top 10 just because it takes on all of those different story elements and things that are quintessentially Star Trek and puts it together. Finally, number one for me, Kyle and I agree a lot when it comes to the number ones. I'm at the unifications. I love the unifications. I loved them when they were first on. I love them now for all the same reasons. You get to see Sarek, you get to see Spock, you get to see all the different shuffles and interplays, and whether Vulcan and Romulan and Romulus end up uniting in the end or not, Kelvin timeline rules change, it doesn't matter. In the moment, it's all about how Leonard Nimoy, Patrick Stewart, Brent Spiner, Mark Leonard when he's there, how they're all doing the thing that Star Trek does so well. And it was a really big deal when it was on, and it's still a big deal to me to watch it. I think the second part is better than the first. I would agree with that, except for the scene between Picard and Sarek. I think Kyle is right. I think they set up the characters in a very purposeful way, and I think you get a lot more of the Spock-Sarek relationship commentary in these two parts than you otherwise would have. You see it in actions and interactions throughout Star Trek, including the original series. But here they talk about it very plainly, and I kind of really enjoy that. And the fact that they set Picard and Sarek up as a parallel, Spock and Data as a parallel, shuffle the deck a little bit, all the while throwing in the Klingons. It just, to me, is Star Trek Palooza, and how can you not like it?
If you think about it, too, like, Sarek and Spock are kind of the backbone of, like, the entire Star Trek timeline.
Kind of.
Everything we've seen goes from, like, essentially, we know about the Federation from about the time when Sarek was helping, and then all the way up until now, Spock dying in the time of Picard. It's huge. They're such important characters. It's ridiculous.
So important that Discovery probably couldn't exist without those characters. Not to mention a new series coming out that Spock is the main character of.
Mm-hmm.
He is very, very popular. That's what that can be said. So those are my three and my honorable mentions. They'll get less of those as we go. We're kind of in the plateau of greatness now, where it's just consistent greatness from here on out. At least for Next Gen for me.
I have one more honorable mention. Just because it hasn't come up in our conversation, I think it's worth mentioning. It might not be the most entertaining or the best written, but it really does hit what I believe is the Star Trek philosophy, and that's the Masterpiece Society. That's where they encounter that culture that is
like the eugenics.
Yeah, they're all planned out, and they basically, they go right up to that awkward moment of, Geordi, you wouldn't exist. You're defective, and that it's Geordi's visor technology that saves it. It just speaks to what one of the pillars of Star Trek of, like, where it goes to the Vulcan in infinite diversity and infinite combinations. We're better because of our differences, and that is still a powerful message today, but was definitely needed back in the 80s and before that. And
it goes back to Space Seed too, like with Khan and the eugenics wars, and
Picard actually makes a mention of him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was worth mentioning, at least, even though it's like, it's in the middle. This is a good episode.
I like the Geordi and Hannah Bates storyline. I like that one about the episode. I don't like the Troy Aaron, what's his name, storyline, because that feels forced to me, especially coming so soon, like literally after the next episode is Conundrum, where at the very end Troy seems to be put out by the fact that Riker sleeps with Ro, and here she is having a relationship with the guy where they don't even come right out and say, well, she probably slept with the guy, but they don't say it right out. But that's the only reason she would make a big deal out of it to Picard is like, well, yeah, I have a personal connection. So
look, let's just be plain language about this. Riker and Troy do not have their SHIT together. And they're constantly being jealous of the other one, and they're constantly flirting around with other people. I said that lightly, or more. Even though they're clearly like each other, and they have this arbitrary rule of we're on the same ship, so therefore we cannot be together. Which is just ridiculous, because she's the ship's counselor, and he's the first officer. So what?
The only reason that it makes even a little sense is because if he was forced to send her on a mission that was dangerous, or she didn't want him to go, or whatever, and I understand. But the amount of time that these people spend having relations with people that they're supposed to be helping on these planets while they're supposed to be at work, that's a lot.
The fact that these two characters end with being on the same working on the same ship, obviously at the end of the last movie, but like, oh, they could have been together all along.
This is what I'm saying. So yes, I agree, and no,
it's in the middle. Yeah,
I like this episode. I don't hate it. It would be in my top half. I thought about it with some consideration because I agree with you, Nick. All of your commentary. I don't think the Troy Aaron thing is necessarily forced. I think she does a good job of saying he's very charming. He's kind of. And he is. It's naturally bred into him that he's charming and diplomatic and a natural-born leader. And I think there's that. She also spends a lot of discussion with, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done this, this was bad news.
And it's also nice to see Troy paired up with a guy that doesn't turn her into a victim, which happens an unfortunate amount in this show.
Also that.
I threw out an honorable mention for the episode Hero Worship, which is when Data saves a little boy's life, and then the little boy decides that he wants to be an android just like Data and starts taking on his mannerisms. And it's a nice little episode about, trauma and grief and how children deal with that. And I feel like, I'm not a child psychologist in any way, but it feels like in this episode, it gets the psychology right, and it gets Deanna's role as a ship's counselor right in helping a child, deal with the trauma of losing his parents on a mission. So I think that deserves an honorable mention. I like that episode a lot.
He thinks he killed the whole ship.
Yeah, that one's middle of the road for me, but I enjoy it. Anything else? Nick, I gotta do the words. Anything else?
I'm just saying that I'm all done.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to say about Season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation that we haven't already said?
It's a good in point, maybe.
Okay.
It was one of the best seasons, in my opinion. So it was an in point for me, because I think this is when I started watching the show regularly.
Point. I thought you said end point. And I was like, are you doing
in? It's an in. It's a good in. If you're new to watching Star Trek The Next Generation, you're just like, I don't know where to start.
The end point is
a good place to start.
I would say the beginning is better.
Well, yes, obviously, but
I don't know.
But being a 9-year-old and only occasionally watching Star Trek The Next Generation before this point, and then this is when I really started to get into the show, it was a good place. I didn't need a lot of the character backstory to fully appreciate the show and really get into it every week. So I guess that's what I'm saying.
Have you introduced your daughter to this show yet?
I haven't, and that is, I don't know why I haven't done that yet.
So don't show her that one episode, the violations.
Yeah, I'm not gonna repeat that episode over and over again to try and get my sound system in my room right.
Oh, don't.
Also, because this is so easily streamed on all the different streamers, I'd say you could start at the beginning too, and it would be okay.
Yes, obviously.
Otherwise, I just thought you were trying to moderate. So let me ask again. Is there anything else you wish to say about Season 5 of The Next Generation before we go off to space, the final frontier? Hearing none! Good job, guys. What I'd like to do is thank Nick, Sarah, Kyle, and Michael for joining me once again to talk about Season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. But we're not done with this series. Or are we not done with this series? There's more to come, so we might as well just roll the credits. Couch Potatoes Unite! Exclamation Point was produced by Back Pocket Productions, run by yours truly, the Chief Couch Potato, which is really another way of saying executively produced by me, Kylie Piette. My associate producers are Krista Pennington and Selene Rezmer. I edit this podcast, and our logo is by Rebecca Wallace. Our marketing graphic artist is Krista. Our theme song was written by Sarah Milbratz and sung by Sarah, Amy McDaniel, and Kels Rezmer. Kels played the keyboard, Ian McDonough played the bass, Christian Somerville played the guitar, and the whole shebang was engineered by Kyle Aspinall and Christian. We hail from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Please, if you like what you hear, take the time to rate us, give us stars, provide comments, or review us wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Amazon are just a few of the places you can find us, but we're also on YouTube. We have our website, and we're now on Patreon at patreon.com/couchpotatoesunite. If you really love us, pledge your support by becoming one of our United Couch Potatoes as we grow our little sofa-populated corner of the world. Otherwise, feel free to tell us how we're doing, what we should add, subtract, keep, or toss. You know how it goes. And if you have suggestions for shows we might consider, contact us at our website where we have a guest book, by email at couchpotatoesunitepodcast@gmail.com, our Facebook, our Twitter at CPU Podcast, our Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite, our Patreon, or wherever you get your podcasts. Though, of course, we add new and old shows to chat about around the water cooler all the time, and always have new episodes coming down the pipe. Just listen to our intros. If you miss old episodes or want to know in general what shows we cover, just search for us. Find us wherever you do searchable things on the internet. Don't forget that exclamation point, or contact us via our website, our email, our social media accounts, and our Patreon to stay up on all the new events and episodes by our humble little podcast, Couch Potatoes Unite! Exclamation point. Until the next time, all the Trek series of the past, with the exception of Discovery and the animated series and Picard and basically anything CBS, is running on All Access, soon to be called Paramount Plus. That might be part of a different discussion we have. Anyway, well, you can basically find all the Star Treks of yore everywhere you stream. So just look, and you can find them, and we're not going to give preference to any one of them. In the meantime, our Star Trek 50 Plus panel will next reconvene to discuss the 6th season of The Next Generation and part 10 of our Looking Back series. So until next time, until next episode, new episodes are published every Wednesday. Keep listening, keep watching, stay tuned!
Hey!